Hey, it's JP here from the Slanted Lens. Today I've got Barbie with me.
Hi.
Barbie's been with us before, and she's going to help us look at two interesting cameras. This is a Fujifilm X100 VI and the Panasonic Lumix S9. These two cameras are very similar in size and weight, but very different in a lot of ways. The S9 is a full-frame camera, whereas the X100 VI is an APS-C camera. But it's a 40 megapixel APS-C sensor versus a full-frame 24 megapixel camera. Let's see if that picture quality looks similar. Let's see how they compare with each other. Let's see which one of these cameras is best for you. I think there's some pretty interesting things we're going to talk about today. So let's get started, see what we can do. The reason I want to do this comparison is because I had a student who wanted a camera to do some stills, do some video, some content creation, but small enough to carry with them, not a big heavy camera. So I looked at these two cameras. I thought this is very interesting. Let's see how they compare with one another. Let's see which one of these solves my student's problem. So let's get started. First off, we have an APS-C sensor. The X100 VI is an APS-C sensor, so it's a crop sensor versus the S9, which is a full-frame sensor. So the X100 VI has a 1.52 crop factor, whereas you have a full-frame sensor on the S9, so there's no crop whatsoever. But the APS-C sensor on that Fuji X100 II is a 40.2 megapixel sensor. So even though it's a crop sensor, it is a 40.2 megapixel sensor. Whereas the full frame sensor on the S9 is a 24.2 megapixel sensor. That means that you have higher quality on that APS-C, or more megapixels. So we want to really see how those two compare. Do you get as much quality out of that crop sensor with a higher megapixel count than you do on a smaller megapixel count on the full frame sensor? We'll take a look at that test a little later here. But price-wise, they come very close to one another. $1,599 for the Fujifilm, $1,497 for the S9. But really what's important when you have a camera, these two cameras, is let's look at an image quality test. Let's look at what that 40 megapixel APS-C sensor, how it's going to compare with a 24 megapixel full frame. So let's take a look at the picture quality test here. I love looking at this test because the color is always so great and fun to analyze, and especially with these two cameras, I love the color on these two cameras. I really, truly do. Both of them give you a beautiful image with a standard color profile. And you look at this right here and you see it. I mean, there's just beautiful color, beautiful rendition of the greens, beautiful rendition of the skin tone. We have the Fuji on the left, and we have the Panasonic on the right. Immediately though, when I look at this from this angle, here you see the difference between an APS-C sensor and a full frame sensor. Look at the background. It's like, it's not near as out of focus on that APS-C, much more out of focus on that full frame. And so the Panasonic S9 has that full frame, gives you that beautiful bokeh in the background that's just beautiful. And we don't get as much of that with an APS-C sensor. It's one of the reasons I do like full frame sensors. First off, the lenses are not exactly the same. We try to get them as close as possible so that we give you the same angle of view. The Fuji is just cropped in a little tighter than what we got with the S9 from Panasonic. But when I've looked at these, and I've looked at several different comparisons between a 40 megapixel or a higher megapixel APS-C sensor versus a full frame, and I do see the difference. So there's the image quality test. There's definitely more information in that full frame. Even though the megapixels on the APS-C are so much more, I still see more detail, more sharpness in that full frame. But let's take a look at ergonomics, because ergonomics is a very important part of these two cameras. I think it's the main reason people buy these cameras, is because of that small form factor, that the ability to put it in your pocket. It's kind of a street photography type camera with the Fujifilm and with the Lumix, and also a content creation. So let's talk about the ergonomics of these two cameras. They're very similar in weight, but the user experience is very different. The Fujifilm is very much an analog type camera setup. It's got the dials for your shutter, it's got the aperture on the lens, it's got your ISO inside a dial inside the shutter dial, and you've got an exposure compensation dial on the top. So it is very much set up so that you see exactly what you're changing. It's a little difficult, it was for me at first, to figure out how to do the different kinds of automatic modes, because it doesn't have a dial that has like manual, shutter priority, or aperture priority. So you have to know how to set this up. Took me a couple of minutes, but once I figured it out, the red A is the automatic mode for the shutter. It just, once you figure that out, and you've done it a couple of times, it's not a hard thing to figure out. So not a hard thing to use. I did find the camera is very small in my hand, but it had a nice ridge along here that I could grab a hold of. That ridge allowed me to get my hand on it. I did wish there was something more on the back. I was hitting that wheel a couple of times and changing things. I didn't have a good place for my hand to rest on the back. So in that way, it was a little difficult to hold. I'm not a lover of an optical viewfinder. It gives you a wider view than what you're actually shooting. It's a rangefinder kind of experience. When I look through, I can see the lines for whatever lens I'm using, whether it's the lens that comes with it, which is that 23, or it goes up into, you know, if you have a 50 or a 75, a 70. So it gives you the lines, and you can see if somebody's, you know, moving into the frame, or you can see how you're cropping, what you take in and out. I've never been a lover of that because even on my Hasselblad that was square, all those years I shot on it, I put tape on the viewfinder so I could frame. I wanted to compose to my image. I use the electronic viewfinder most of the time I was using this camera because it allowed me to take an image, look at the image, and just really see exactly what I had. So in that way, it has a pop-out screen on the back, which is nice. It pops up, which is good. It does not make this a vlogging type camera. It's very much a camera to shoot and do kind of street photography kinds of things. So the Lumix S9 has more of a typical mirrorless camera experience. It's going to be like the S5 II, it's going to be like your Sony cameras, and that is that it's not like an analog camera. You do have a dial that gives you the different modes on the top of the camera, but from there, most of your, all of your features are going to be internal. So you're going to change your shutter, your aperture with the front wheel, I shutter with the back round wheel. And that really is the way this camera is going to work. You can hit the Q button on the back if you want to access menus. It just gives you a different kind of experience. It doesn't have a ridge here, which is unfortunate because that smoothness there, I found it hard to hold. It does have a great ridge on the back, which I really found helpful because that gave me a place to hold there. But this just made it hard for me to hold it and feel comfortable it wasn't going to slip out of my hands. I had on it a small ridge made by Small Rig that really made this work. And that's a very inexpensive device that gives you that ridge there, so it makes it easy for you to hold it in your hand. I do like the fact with this camera that you do have the wheel on the back that allows you to be able to get ISO, your white balance, and your drive speeds, different drives there. You're gonna have to dive into the menus for most of the things you're going to do with this camera. You don't have an EVF with this camera. It is just going to be the screen on the back that allows you to look at the screen to shoot. Double tap on it though, it gives you a punched in view so you can see exactly what the image looks like, whether it's sharp or in focus. So that I think was really helpful. So I do love the fact that this is an L mount and that allows you to change your lenses. That's huge for me because it means you're going to have different lenses. They'll be manufacturing new lenses that'll be changing all the time to make this more and more useful. So Panasonic just released an 18 to 40 millimeter lens. This is a 4563. This lens is perfect for the S9 because it is so compact. It gives you a very small form factor that allows this lens to be short enough and compact enough you can put it into a bag, you can carry it with you very easily, and it gives you a great range. It's 18 to 40, which is fabulous. The lens is made, it has weatherproofing and sealing so that it will work. It's really of the build quality for the S5 II or S5 IIX, so it's an excellent lens that makes this camera a lot more portable, and I think that's an option that makes this camera work. This does have a pop-out screen. That pop-out screen allows you to vlog with it. I've seen people put it on their chest if they want to be able to use it on their chest as a recording device there as well. So I think that pop-out screen is really a nice addition. It makes this much more useful. We do not have an EVF on this camera. You're just looking at the back screen. On the top, we've got a cold shoe, not a hot shoe. It's just going to allow you to put devices on there. Whereas with the Fuji X100, we do have a hot shoe, which allows you to put a small strobe device on there and to be able to use strobes with it. All in all, I found this very intuitive because it's the mirrorless experience I've had both on Panasonic, with the S5 II, the S5 IIX, on all the Sonys I've ever shot, very similar to Nikon. I mean, it's just that it's most of the stuff is done in the menus. Once you figure out a few buttons here on this wheel, it has your ISO, your white balance, your drive modes. I mean, once you go to that wheel a couple of times and figure that out, it's very fast. Also, it has a LUT button on the top, which I found really interesting because it was fast to change the LUTs. I just hit that button and I can scroll through and choose whatever LUT I want to put on the camera at the time. And that was huge. So the LUTs on the S9 are increasing all the time. Panasonic is creating LUTs. A lot of the community are going to start to be able to create LUTs. There's almost 100 of them available right now. And certainly you have the option to create your own, so you have a whole library of the LUTs that you like, and then you can use them for the applications that work best for your kind of work flow. You know, Fuji also has great LUTs. They have great film simulations. They're always working on those to update them and to add others, and those are a lot of fun to shoot with. The Panasonic just makes it so you can make your own, and you can add them to the camera, and you can access them really quickly through the LUT button, so you can switch back and forth really quick. So there's some nice options there with the Panasonic when it comes to LUTs. The Lumix has Wi-Fi that allows you to connect to their app and to post immediately. So you can shoot a piece of video, you can edit it on your phone, and you can send it out to social media. So it's very quick that way. So the Fuji X100 VI has the camera to cloud using Frame.io. Fujifilm has been talking about this for a while. It's been in some of their cameras for a while, and this has that ability to quickly get things uploaded to the cloud, to be able to get access and to be able to share files, both videos, raw and JPEGs and video. So that has that kind of process as well as we have here, to kind of from your camera to phone to post. So all in all, I found this an experience that I enjoyed. And do you know what I found with both of these cameras? Do you know what I found? When I had these, I was more likely to carry a camera in both cases, because they're small enough that I can put it in my bag, I can put it in my briefcase, I can carry it in my pocket. Whereas my larger cameras, I just don't carry them much anymore, which means I'm shooting everything on my phone. So these cameras are kind of getting us back into a form factor that makes it much easier to carry with you and to be able to have a camera with you all the time. So there's a look at the form factor of these two cameras. Very different, but in a very similar package. Autofocus points between these two cameras, you get 425 autofocus points with the Fuji, whereas you get 779 autofocus points with the Lumix S9. When it comes to autofocus, both these cameras have your phase detect, you have your people, animal, birds, you know, planes, motorcycles, all those different options in the cameras. So in order to really see how they function, we just needed to test them. So let's do an autofocus stills test and just take a look at how these two cameras compare as you have a person walking towards you doing autofocus. So here's our autofocus test. So looking at the autofocus and stills mode was really interesting for me. I always have the person walk towards us, and then we shoot at a fairly fast frame rate. We're getting about 20 frames on the Fuji film. I'm getting about 25 or so on the S9. So a little difference in the number of frames we're getting as she walks towards us. But on the S9, I lost about 4 out of 25, and on the Fuji, I lost about 1. So the Fuji consistently seemed to be a little better. It seemed to be a little better at tracking her and held the images just a little better. So take a look at those two side by side. We did lose a few more on the Lumix S9, but the Lumix S9 was also shooting more frames in that same time frame. But they were very close, very acceptable focus for each of them. But I think the Fuji kind of edged out the S9 a bit. So let's take a look at continuous shooting. The Fujifilm has a mechanical shutter. It gives you 11 frames per second, allows you to shoot up to 33 RAW or 38 JPEGs, compared to the S9, which has no mechanical shutter. So when you look at electronic shutter, the Fujifilm gives you about 13 frames per second, so 38 RAW up to 80 JPEGs, whereas the S9 has 30 frames per second with a pre-burst. I love this pre-burst. I've used it on several cameras. I just love this option. Basically what it is when you just activate the camera is awake, that the camera is shooting frames and it's pre-bursting. It's giving you up to 1 second, 3 seconds, 5 seconds. And that pre-burst is it's shooting frames, but when you go to hit the shutter, it now gives you those 1, 2, or 3 seconds before. So if I'm focused on a bird and the bird takes off and I hit my shutter the minute I see it taking off, I've got the 2 seconds before I see the bird go from sitting to taking off. I catch all that. That pre-burst is super useful and something I really have enjoyed shooting with. All right, so now let's go on to our autofocus test and let's take a look at how the autofocus fares between these two cameras in video mode. When it comes to the autofocus video test, look at these two side by side. The Panasonic holds her, she comes, she turns around, she walks away. We're holding the focus almost all the way through that clip. There might be a slight little moment there when she turns, but look at the Fuji. The Fuji comes, she loses focus as she comes closer to us, as she turns. We lose the focus several different places in this Fuji clip, and I did this over and over again to see if it was just an anomaly, but it wasn't. But in the end, the autofocus was quite a bit better in video mode on the Panasonic than it was on the Fujifilm. So let's take a look at some of the general specs of these two cameras when it comes to video. S9 is really all about open gate, giving you that full frame from top to bottom to allow you to record in a horizontal or a vertical crop from that full open gate recording. You don't have open gate with the Fujifilm, you're really recording in 16:9. But the Fujifilm has built-in ND, which is really fabulous and allows you to shoot out in open sun better, whereas you don't have ND filters with the S9. But internal recording between these two is very interesting because the Fujifilm really has 6.2K capture, 10-bit recording. It's got 4K up to 30 frames a second with no crop and up to 60 frames a second with a 1.14 crop. The Lumix, though, has a much deeper range of different video specs. It's got 4K 3.2 open gate video in 24 or 30. They also got a new MP4 Lite codec, which is a 50 megabit codec, which allows you to shoot something a little more compressed, and it goes quicker to your phone, quicker to the internet, allows you to get video up faster, and you don't need all that bit depth and quality when it comes to being on the internet. So that's an interesting application that you have with the S9, which has its own button in the Q menu to be able to get into that codec Lite, that MP4 Lite. It has 6K 3.2 open gate video up to 30 frames a second in 420 10-bit. It has 6K UHD 4K from full sensor width up to 30 frames a second. It really gives us a variety of codecs. It doesn't have an all-I. Most everything is long GOP, but it does give you that default 4K open gate video downsampling from 6K. That's looking at the entire sensor area of the camera rather than a 16:9. So it really gives you a lot of options when it comes to generating video later on in the process. And the reason the S9 does that, as I've said, is to be able to make it quicker, to be able to move that information from the camera onto their app, and that app allows you to interface with your social media and be able to go get things up to social media as fast as possible. Both of these cameras have recording limits. The Fujifilm has 45 minutes in 4K, which is pretty respectable. The S9 has up to 15 minutes in 4K. So when the S9 came out, it had a record limit of 15 minutes. With their new firmware update, it allows you to turn that record limit off, so you can allow it to run longer. And it depends on the situation you're in, whether you're out in the sun or you're inside in a cool studio situation. It's going to run for a lot longer, and it gives you the ability to run just till the camera would start to overheat or have problems. But at least that record limit's been removed, which allows you to record longer clips, which is really nice. Both these cameras are really made to do short clips that you can use and get up to social media quickly. They both have log. You got F-Log and F-Log 2 with the Fujifilm, and you got V-Log with the S9. They both will allow external recording. The Fujifilm has 10-bit via the HDMI, and the S9 has 8 and 10-bit via the HDMI. So they'll both do external recording. In that external recording mode, the X100 VI has 6K 24 and 30 frames, and the S9 has 4K 24 and 30 frames. Both of these cameras have a micro HDMI cable. Not my favorite cable in the world, but they both have that small micro cable because they're small, compact cameras. This is an area that I think is really interesting, and one of the reasons why I think these two cameras compare with one another, and that is the LUT capabilities. Fujifilm has always loved and always had great LUTs when it comes to film simulations, and I think that's always been really interesting. I think they're wonderful to look at. So let's take a look at some of the LUT capabilities of these two cameras, because LUT or preset, you can use those two together. They're pretty much synonymous with one another. So let's talk about LUTs or presets for these two cameras. They're both made with that idea that you can do quick presets in the camera to be able to give you something you can immediately push out to social media. That's kind of the idea, the goal. And so they come with presets. There's 19 film simulation presets with grain you can add on the Fujifilm. And those are great. People love them. They give you great looks at the different, they're emulating the different films that have been made over the years. You go into black and whites, you have sepia tone, you have just different color films. Again, there's 19 different films. We're not showing them all here. And so they're really built around the fact that you have pre-done presets in the camera that emulate the different films that Fuji has used over the years, which is beautiful and wonderful. The S9 has a much different approach. The S9 is taking and allowing you to apply LUTs, they call them LUTs or presets, in the camera. You can create LUTs in the camera, you can use them with an app, you can create those apps, create the LUTs in the app, put them right back on the camera. It just becomes a matter of creating different LUTs. There's a whole bunch of LUTs you can look up and you can load on your camera. You can save up to 39 LUTs on the S9 and just give you the different looks you want. I've gone through a process of looking at different films, different film emulations, and kind of changing them, creating my own LUTs and bringing them onto the S9 to give me the film looks that I like. I created one on the end here, which is kind of, I just called it open or window light. It's just an open color look for me. I really like this look. There's kind of a vintage type of look that gives you that kind of charcoaly looking blacks. So you really have the ability to create whatever looks you like. And on the fly, you can take an image, you can edit it in camera or in the app and immediately post it on social media. So this camera really is about quick social media information. But remember, these are just on the JPEG. These don't affect the RAW. The RAW gives you all the raw information. So they have a different type of workflow and look at LUTs, but they both have that ability to create, that have presets or create LUTs, and I think that's really interesting on both these cameras. I think that's a lot of fun, and I think that's something that is really interesting about these cameras, and it really is just an interesting creative way to create the looks that you want when you're shooting. They both use an app that allow you to move the information to the cloud. The mobile app, a Fujifilm X app. We also have the Lumix Lab app that allows you to move your information to a creative space. The Lumix is a little more geared towards social media and getting things to be able to edit things in camera, in the app, and then get it up to social media as quickly as possible. So that kind of camera to cloud or camera to smartphone. Fuji is camera to cloud, Lumix is camera to smartphone. And you're using that app on your smartphone to post things for the Lumix, whereas when you move things from camera to cloud, you really are about getting those things from the cloud and now having to go into another application to create any kind of social media. So as far as a social media content creator type camera, I think the S9 is more really focused on being able to create that seamless experience to get things shot and posted as quickly as possible. So let's take a look at the image stabilization between these two cameras. So of course the Fujifilm has 5-axis image sensor stabilization, but it's only in video mode. Whereas the S9's got that sensor shift 5-axis stabilization both in stills and in video, which allows you to handhold your camera for longer shutter speeds and to give yourself steady and sharp stills. But the video is very interesting as we compare these two. Let's take a look at the image stabilization test as we compare these two head to head. So I got out my side-by-side rig so I could test the stabilization with these two cameras. You can see the same clip at the same time with both cameras. It's a handheld too. I got my hands on both sides of it. And when I look at these two pieces next to each other, the two pieces of video that we got, it's immediately obvious that the Panasonic is much smoother. We get a lot of jumping on the Fujifilm. Panasonic is quite a bit smoother, and so it just really performed quite a bit better as I looked at it. And you can see those side by side. You can see for yourself exactly how they were reacting as I was walking around. She's turning, I'm turning. There's a lot of steps in there. You can see how much you feel the steps with the two cameras. But it's pretty clear that the Panasonic was much nicer with stabilization, gave us a much more stable shot. So looking at the ISO capabilities between these two cameras, the Fujifilm goes up to 12,800, whereas you have 51,300 on the Lumix, but you can extend it to up to 204,800. So let's take a look at the ISO capabilities. We're going to jump right in at 400 ISO because until that you really don't see much at all. We look at the X100 VI, and it's pretty clean at 400 ISO. I mean, it really is. But immediately, I can see a slight difference. I think the S9 definitely is a little cleaner at 400. If we jump to 800, Now look at that 800, and again you see it's just a little cleaner in the background, just a little cleaner. The digital noise is a little more prominent on the Fuji. If we jump up to 1600, it just continues to kind of build at that point, and you start to see it at 1600 quite a bit more. When we go up to 3200, the Fujifilm is definitely looking more and more, it has more digital noise. It's starting to have that kind of what looks like a grain pattern. We aren't seeing really any, on the bridge of the nose, you can usually start to see a transition red start. They both have a little bit of that, but it's a little more pronounced on the Fujifilm. Let's go up to from 32 to 6400. We should start to see that red bridge on the nose start to become more distinct. Look at the grain pattern on the face. It's just much cleaner on the Lumix. The S9 just is holding the ISO a little bit better. We go to 12,800. We see that on the Fuji. It's starting to become very, very prominent, the digital noise, and it's just much cleaner all the way around on the Panasonic. But the Panasonic goes on up. We're going to go now to 25,600. So the S9 25,600 starts to look a little bit like the 12,800 on the Fuji. It's even a little cleaner, it feels like. But we're going to 25,600. We also go up to 51,200, and that's where we really see that heavy grain. So there's the best. That's the highest ISO, 51,200 on the S9, and let's compare that. Let's start here with the very best that we get out of the Fuji. So the Fuji is 12,800. Let's look at those two side by side. Panasonic, 12,800. Yeah, well, the 51,200 is definitely more digital noise than the 12,800 of Fujifilm, but it's two stops up. So I think that the S9 has a much cleaner ISO all the way through, and I think it's performing almost a stop better, maybe a stop and a half better than the Fujifilm. All right, first off, let's take a look at the dynamic range with these two cameras. Immediately with an APS-C sensor and a full frame, you see the difference in depth of field. That's not really what we're here to talk about with this test, but you certainly see it. With the APS-C, the sign in front's in focus, the counter's more in focus. But the reason I bring this up, because the S9, that full frame, the focus is much shallower. So it's important for us to not get confused about depth of field or focus sharpness versus dynamic range. Because sometimes the focus in the background looks sharper, and that gives us the impression that there's more dynamic range. Because the full frame is falling more out of focus, the APS-C looks more in focus, so it feels like it's holding the highlights more because it's more in focus, but that's not necessarily the case. These two are pretty similar here. I think maybe the Fuji is a slight bit better. If you look out the window in the background, you see how it's holding back there. I'm getting a pretty nice, they're both holding, they're both clipping. I'm losing the whites on the white vehicles in the background, so they're both kind of falling out there. So they're very similar, I think. When I come to -1, so we've come to -1, and we have quite a bit of detail in the background on both of these. Again, I'm looking at focus here, and the depth of field starts to make me feel like that it gives me more detail in the background, but that's not the case. It's just more out of focus of the background. At -1, if we concentrate on those vehicles out the window, we do see that they're both clipping on those white cars. We see detail more in the trees and things in the background, but sometimes that can feel a little hard to understand because of the focus difference on these two cameras. I think they're very similar. I think they're holding that background very similar. When we go to -2 is beautiful on both these cameras because we still have a decent skin tone, the color's not shifting, but we have great detail out the window on the back, and it's giving us really the highlights. Yeah, they're very similar here. -3 might cause a problem. Colors may start to shift a bit, but not really. It's looking pretty good. It's amazing to me with digital cameras how you can underexpose them so far, and it certainly helps the background. We're getting great detail on both these cameras out the background, in the background. Again, it's really difficult to not let the focus fool you as to what has more dynamic range, because focus is different than dynamic range. I'm still seeing the tones in the background on the S9, whereas even though they're sharper on the X100 VI, it doesn't mean there's more detail there, it just means they're not as in focus. But we're getting the great tones in the background. I think these are very similar. Let's go to -4. -4 really looks very good on both these cameras. We're holding details in the background. The color hasn't shifted too bad. Both these cameras are hanging in there pretty well when it comes to dynamic range. Let's go to now +1. This is always an interesting journey when you go to +1. Look at how the background just starts to posterize immediately. There's no detail in the whites back there at all. Our color looks pretty good on both of them at +1, but the background's lost a lot of detail on both these cameras. If we go to +2, look at how it starts to posterize in the back, and the color starts to shift just a little bit. I see it in the Panasonic, I see it a little bit in the Fuji, but if we go to +3, the color should really shift at this point, and it does. Both these cameras start to shift, and maybe the Fuji not quite as much as the Panasonic. Well, they both shift. Look at the background. It's just posterized at that point, and the color shifted really kind of yellowish, and they both lost it. I'm kind of surprised. These two cameras seem very close to each other. I would have expected the S9 to kind of really outstep the Fujifilm because of the full frame sensor, but they seem very, very similar to me. So there's a look at the dynamic range. It's kind of a tie in my mind. So let's wrap this up. I had a very different experience with these two cameras. I absolutely love shooting with the Fujifilm X100VI. It was just fun. It's a retro camera. I got used to the EVF versus OVF very quickly. It was fun to be able to shoot some of those different film simulations. I love the small compact size of it, the way it went in my pocket. I really enjoyed that a lot. I did find it kind of hit a wall when it came to lens choice. So with the S9, I had a different experience because of lens choice. I was able to choose different lenses or zoom lenses. I love shooting with zoom lenses. I generally have a zoom on because I want to be able to change that focal length and to be able to get in a little tighter, get a little wider. It just gives me a lot of different options. So I enjoyed the lens kind of capabilities I was able to get with the S9. So as I had this experience, the one thing that I really missed with the S9 was that EVF. I find it fascinating that they didn't include that. I think that's something that, as we see an S9 II with an EVF, this camera for me is really a strong camera. It checks a lot of boxes, both for video and stills. The one thing about it I can say is I carry a camera this size. I've used that S9, it's in my bag, it's with me. We were traveling through Idaho just a week ago, and I saw some beautiful video, a beautiful scene as the mountains and the sprinklers and the sun's going down, and I just grabbed the S9, ran out, recorded some video really quickly, and I got some beautiful shots. You know, they say the camera, what's the best camera? The one that's with you. And this smaller form factor is something I'm going to carry with me more often, and something that I think really makes them worthwhile. So there's a look at those two cameras, very similar in so many ways and not so similar in a lot of ways. So you decide which one of these cameras is best for you, and keep those cameras rolling, keep on clicking.